I'm going to chalk this up. Never talked to him. I just know about him. Probably the most interesting man alive. The guy that we can blame in probably a good way for our childhoods. And I'll explain here in a second, because he's one of Hollywood's most admired and accomplished casting directors. He's got a new book, Sex, Drugs, and Pilot Season, Confessions of a Casting Director. It is the one and the only Joel Thurm. How are you, Joel?
I'm fine, thank you. See, well, let's see. There's the book.
Yeah.
Don't I look the same as the cover?
You look great either way, Joel. How about that? So before we get into every single name that has been a part and show that has been a part of mine and my audience's lives, let's first start figuring out. You tell us, how did you get the job as a casting director and the man with the power to place people into superstardom?
Well, one thing I got to correct. I don't place. I suggest, I cajole, I twist arms, I do everything I can, but I don't make the decisions.
Okay.
How I became a casting director was, it just happens to, again, it's Cinderella in a way. Did you ever hear of a Broadway producer, David Merrick?
I have not.
Well, how old are you?
I'm 47.
All right. Well, if you added two more decades, you'd know him. He was the most important producer of Broadway in the 60s. Mm-hmm. Hello, Dolly, Gypsy, Rosencrantz and Guildenstern are dead, a whole slew. I got to work in his office in a business capacity. I was assistant to his general manager. But I was lucky enough every morning, there was no such thing as Mr. Coffee then. So you had to buy it on the corner and bring it up with the bagels. And every day before work, we would talk about movies or plays that I had seen the night before. And this guy was obviously listening to me. And one day he called me into his office and he said, "Look, I can't stand working with you anymore. So you got a choice. You can go become our casting director, reopen our casting department, get a $50 a week raise, or you're walking out the door and you're fired." And I said, "Jack, I don't know anything about casting." And he said, "Yes, you do. You just don't know you do." And that's how I became the casting director without any prior experience for the most important theatrical producer in New York. And then it grew from that.
And that's why you can write a book today, because, and I always say this, it's always about the story. Everybody with an interesting job has a story behind it. Most of the time they didn't want to do it. I didn't want to do radio. It just fell into my lap. It was an accident, a happy accident sometimes. In your case, the same exact thing. So you go and you start becoming a casting director, like you said, had no idea what you're doing. Do you remember who you cast first in what?
Well, the first, you wouldn't know any of these people, but they were casting replacements in our musicals. Pearl Bailey was doing Hello, Dolly, and there were always replacements in that, and Promises, and the first new play I did was Play It Again, Sam, a Woody Allen play. Mm-hmm. So I did that, and then there was another one which was at the end of the season called Child's Play. You've never heard of these, but Child's Play won a Tony that year, and two of the actors won Tonys, and Merrick actually gave me a raise, something that he was never known to do. But what happened is, the lucky thing for me was Pearl Bailey, who was then the fifth Hello, Dolly, the fifth woman to play that. Part of my job was to keep her happy. Mm. Meaning her family was in California. She was here all alone. So I would have to go to dinner with her. It's like 3 nights a week, down the street at the then, the place to be seen was Sardi's. And we formed this wonderful relationship. She became my adopted mother. And when she was offered a show in California, a variety show, and just like you said, you wound up in radio. She said, "Do you want to come to California and work on the show?" I said, "Sure, why not?" I never planned one iota, one beat of my career. It was always someone saying, "Oh, do you want to do this?" I said, "Sure, why not?" So that's how I got to California.
And you get to California, and you're working for her and her variety show.
On her variety show, yeah.
And then when was the pivotal point that you left that show and then started casting for other things, correct?
Well, what I found out was that when I got to California to work on her show, there was no job. That's
Oh,
how I discovered that a star can have a posse. And you could be part of the posse, and there was no job, and that was not good for me. But I finally did get a job doing music clearances, which can be an important job, but it only took a couple of hours a week. And then her show was dead on arrival because of other shows like Laugh-In that were superseding the old-fashioned variety shows. So I kind of spent 2 years in the desert, picking up shows, picking up various casting gigs. I was offered a local production of Tommy, and I'm handed a record. Cast this. I said, well, how do you cast with a record? And then I was told, that's your job, figure it out. But here's an example.
Get high and listen to it. That's what you do.
Oh, yeah, but then anyway, Teddy Neely, not so bad, who went on to play Jesus and Supers in the movie of Superstar. And I also found a woman by the name of Annette Cardona, who a couple of years later, she's Cha-Cha de Gregorio in Greece. Indelibly in an incredible part. She's no longer with us, but I mean, that's the way it works. And then finally, I was able to meet a woman by the name of Ethel Wynant, who was head of casting for CBS. And there was a change in style going on where pretty people were going out for a while. They're always there, but thanks to Norman Lear, normal-looking people were coming in, and they all came in from New York, without perfect teeth and perfect hair and so on. And she hired me to work on her. It added me to her department, and before I knew it, I was casting the Bob Newhart show.
That was kind of Norman Lear's thing, right? Was like, what I want to showcase on television is what people are living every day.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. All in the Family, Maude, right. Sanford, all of those are his shows. And there wasn't anyone who was going to become, America's most sexy, whatever People does, the sexiest man in America. None of them were on any of Norman Lear's shows, nor were the women, But again, I had the knowledge of the New York actors that her department didn't have. So and also in 1974, I got lucky again by the same guy who handed me the record for Tommy, said, we're doing a new show called The Rocky Horror Show.
Oh, okay.
And so I cast the first U.S. stage production of Rocky Horror. And then right after that was over, we went right into casting the movie. And that was about like 74, 75.
Yeah.
So that was, so that, and it just builds. And I was very lucky to get good things to cast. You come off well if the material is good. And I was very lucky to have wonderful writing to work with.
It's same in sports. You can have a fantastic professional player. If they're on a bad team with bad coaching and bad upper management, you're never going to be considered one of the greatest players because you'll never win. And I've always said that as well with actors, is that, you make it to that level, you're not bad at what you do. I mean, it's very difficult to do the simplest things that these people do. But if it's a bad movie, if it's bad, right? I mean, we've seen people win Grammys and then flop right afterwards because of bad pictures.
Yeah. Well, I was very lucky, and I think Rocky Horror did something, and I learned something on Rocky Horror. Susan Sarandon's agents, when I called to set up an audition for Susan Sarandon, I was told, and I knew Susan personally. So, I don't know how much time I have, but shall we say, Susan Sarandon met Barry Bostwick at my little apartment for dinner. And a couple of weeks later, she and Barry were a couple. This is before the casting. This is so. Anyway, Barry was kind of a lock for the role of Brad for the movie. He didn't want to do but I I called Susan's brand new high-powered agent. She just moved out from New York, and I said, I'd like to set up an audition for Susan. And they said, oh, no. This is not the kind of a project we want for her, and she certainly won't audition. And I said, okay. So one of the reasons I was a good casting director is I could be as devious as necessary. And so I thought, okay, I called Barry and I said, Barry, when you come in for your audition, just bring Susan. Just make sure she's there. So, and then I'll do everything else. What Barry didn't know was the producer and director already knew Barry's work from Broadway, and he was a lock. I didn't bring in anybody else for that part, but he didn't know that. So he comes on stage and ready to audition, and I usually would read with the actors. So I started reading with Barry, and then I said, this is ridiculous. I said, why are you reading with this 30-year-old balding Jewish young man? Why not? Susan, can you do me a favor and please come up and read with Barry? Well, that's why it was really good, because I would think out of the box and do things like that.
Uh-huh.
So Susan starts reading with Barry, and the director says, "Who is she?" And then I explain, and then he says, "Susan, did you bring a song?" And Susan said, "No, but," and then I jump in and said, "Well, could you do Happy Birthday?" She sang Happy Birthday in that same sweet soprano you hear in the movie.
Yeah.
And that's how Susan Sarandon got in Rocky Horror.
That's just the story, Joel. I mean, like, whether you've seen the original Rocky Horror or not, just the story of you telling everybody how that happened behind the scenes. That's not stuff that's talked about at junkets and pressers.
No, it's not. But I mean, to me, that was normal. That's what I would always do things like that, and I think that's why I separated myself from the pack of casting directors, because I went so outside the lines, for the good of the project.
Then you get into the 80s, right? And
Yes.
then television changes slightly, or a lot, actually, I guess, depending on who you'd ask. And you are now working for NBC?
Well, yeah, I mean, we skipped through the whole 70s, which, of course, we're skipping Grease, Boy in the Plastic Bubble.
Go back to Grease.
We'll go back to them.
Yeah,
but the 80s was different, because in the 80s, I got hired to be head of casting for NBC. Head of talent and casting for NBC. That's a job where you're no longer casting. You're sort of like quality control. Mm-hmm. The final auditions were held in my office. And I wouldn't be making the decisions, but I was very influential in making the decisions. I'm trying to think. Let me give you a good example. Family Ties.
Love it.
Gary Goldberg, a wonderful, wonderful writer, wrote a great script, and he knew who he wanted, and he brought in his cast choices. For the mother, he brought in Donna McKechnie from A Chorus Line.
Okay.
For the father, another Sarandon, he wanted Chris Sarandon, Susan's ex-husband. And first of all, her name just went out of my head, from Chorus Line, Donna. Donna read very, very badly. And Donna will be the first person to say, I'm not an actress, I'm a dancer. Mm-hmm. So she read badly, and I said, look, I'm going to give you an idea. She's not new, but she's now can play mothers. Maybe you should see... oh God, Joel, this is terrible. Meredith Baxter. Bernie. She's been around for a while, but she's, it's a good idea. And for Chris, I said NBC did not like him because that he was unlikable. A phrase that has come up, that unless you're likable on television, you don't get cast. And then I said, you should see this guy in New York. I'd seen him in a play where he was playing a German drag queen, which is not germane to Family Ties. But when I saw him afterwards, if you close your eyes, he sounds exactly like Alan Alda. Uh-huh. And has that same, his name was Michael Gross.
Right.
They saw him and they hired him. So, that's the kind of thing that I would do. So I wasn't casting myself, but believe me, I was influencing the shows in that manner.
Did you, I don't know if the word cast would be correct, but were you the one to place Tom Hanks on the episode as the uncle?
I have no idea what you're talking about. Did Tom Hanks do an episode of Family Ties?
Yeah, he did.
You know more than I do. I didn't know that.
Tom Hanks was the uncle with a drinking problem, and he swore that he had stopped drinking. And then Michael J. Fox, a.k.a. Alex P. Keaton, he catches his uncle in the cabinet drinking vanilla extract to satisfy his alcohol issues.
I tried that. It doesn't work. But no, Family Ties was lucky to have a wonderful, wonderful casting director by the name of Judith Weiner. So once the project was cast and the set, I was not involved in the day-to-day, week-to-week casting.
Gotcha.
But Judith Weiner fought for Michael. She fought for him, and Brandon didn't want Michael Fox. He didn't think he was cute enough. Well, we all ganged up on Brandon, and he gave in.
Who did they want? Who did they want?
Well, first the offer went to, oh God, who's married to Sarah Jessica Parker?
Oh,
Broderick.
Matthew Broderick.
Matthew Broderick.
Yeah.
Matthew Broderick was going to do it, but then he got the Broadway play. Second was Zach Galligan, who got Gremlins. So third choice was this unknown Canadian actor that the casting director found and was pushing. And she was right. So I got behind her and pushed. So that's how. But Judith also cast the Golden Girls. So she did a wonderful job, you know. So that was that.
And with the Golden Girls, a totally probably different approach to casting, I'm assuming.
Well, totally, because the first attempt was to try to use unknown actresses. And Judith and her partner, they scoured New York, they scoured LA, and they were really good actresses, but it didn't work using actresses. You needed to hire known people with known personalities. And that's eventually what happened. And my boss, Brandon Tartikoff, did not want B. Arthur.
Wow.
He said she's poison, that the public out there hates her. And I went through a whole series of hoops that I jumped through, and I flew out Elaine Stritch. Do you know who she was or is?
You're going to have to say it, and I'm sure I will.
Elaine Stritch later on went on to become famous from the Broadway play Company, where she sang Ladies Who Lunch.
Got it. Okay.
Later, she played Alec Baldwin's mother on 30 Rock.
Got it.
But the point is, she's just as acerbic and just as mean and could kill you with a look, just like B. Arthur did. But I flew her out, went through all of this, only to find out that the writer wrote it only for B. Arthur and would never approve anybody else. So Brandon finally came around and said, okay. But when Susan Harris said, this is not the B. Arthur show, this is a group. So you may not like B. Arthur, but you're going to like Betty White.
Yeah. Oh, who does? Didn't. Yeah.
So B. Arthur didn't like her, but that's a whole other story.
Yeah. I can, we've all heard those rumors, but can you imagine being on that set and those women, having heat with each other, especially Betty White? Betty White is pure as the driven snow, and like from the fans' perspective, right? I mean, she might have a mean side, who knows? But she put on a great act her entire life. I've always loved Betty White.
There was never any dissension on the set at all. It was all wonderful on the set. They got along great. There was never a problem on the set. But personally, B did not like Betty and didn't like her work ethic. B was an actress who had to prepare and wasn't used to being. If you had to cut tape for a minute, Betty would be fooling around while
who's that? Who's that?
Someone calling me who I'm sitting on my phone.
It's Brad Pitt. He wants to know where you're at. You're supposed to meet him for lunch.
No, I have no plans today. You're it. But you suddenly disappeared. Did I disappear from you?
No, I can still see you fine. I'm just trying to figure out who's calling you. I think it's Brad Pitt.
All right. Well, I don't. But you've disappeared from my screen. But I'll just go on. If you can see me, that's fine.
I can see you just fine. Yeah, absolutely.
But anyway, like Betty White would giggle and make the audience laugh, and that would disturb B's concentration. So that created a big problem, and eventually, publicly, B called Betty White the unmentionable C word.
Ooh, can't have that.
So,
can't have that.
Anyway, moving along.
So tell me about the situation with Jason Bateman and Ricky Schroeder. Silver Spoons was a child like myself, my age, growing up, was a dream. You wanted to live in the castle. You wanted to ride the train. You wanted you wanted all that stuff. But there was heat between those two. Really, the parents, right?
They were great. It was Ricky's mother. Jason and Ricky were a great pair. Ricky being the straight man and Jason being the funny man. But Ricky, it was originally called the Ricky Schroeder. It was Silver Spoons, the Ricky Schroeder Show, whatever. And Ricky's mother very stupidly did not realize that there was gold in the two of them. Unlike, shall we say, Ronnie Howard's mother, who realized the combination of Henry Winkler and Ronnie Howard was better than ever imaginable and a godsend to the show. Well, we basically had to fire Jason, and I found, Alfonso.
Yeah.
But it was not the same because Alfonso is not exactly a comedian, so the show didn't last.
Yeah.
But blame Ricky's mother for that. That's all her.
How does because he was what, 10, 11, 12 years
I
old?
haven't. Yeah, I'd say I'm older than 10. I'd probably preteen, but I think that he'd be a tween. That's the expression now.
How do you handle that? Your first big acting job and everything's great, and because of stuff that you can't control, you're now fired and out of a job. Do you treat him like an adult?
I can't get into Jason's mind. I can't tell you what he was feeling then, but we immediately put him onto a different show.
Oh.
Another show, and that lasted for maybe a season or 2 seasons, which kept him off the market for other networks, and then put him on Valerie Harper's show. Mm-hmm. So he stayed on NBC all those years.
I would think during that time, just like any decade, there's, a group of young actors that are probably trying to compete for the same show often. You had the Michael J. Foxes, the Batemans, the Joey Lawrences,
Yep.
Then you get into the 90s, you got the Feldmans, the Hams, those types of, there's always a group of those kids, right?
They're new. Every generation has new people.
The Phoenixes.
And some of them have very long careers. Look at Mayim Bialik. Whoever thought that kid was going to wind up hosting Jeopardy?
Also, the Phoenixes. I left them out too.
The Phoenixes.
And you had a part in the Phoenixes, that family's lives. Right?
Just a small one. No, I'm joking. I was very lucky to have met their mother and hired their mother as my secretary at NBC for 5 years. And I got to know and love these kids. To me, they're like nieces and nephews. And, I went to see them perform in the streets in Westwood with their guitars and, just sort of busking for money. But Arlen and her husband, John, brought the kids out to California because they thought that there was something in them that they could work in show business. And, of course, they were right. But I got the kids their first agent, can I curse on here a little bit?
Absolutely.
All right. So the best kid agents in that time was a woman named Iris Burton. So I said to Arlen, I said, do you mind if I send the kids over to the best kids agent in town, and let's see what she says? And she said, well, if it's not, something against NB policy, sure, please. So I sent all the kids over to Iris, and I get called back later. She said, you mean I got to hire the whole fucking family if I want one? And I said, yes. And then she said, but that River, is he gorgeous? And I said, yes. She said, but what are they going to do? They won't do commercials for dairy. They won't do anything with leather. What am I supposed to do with them? And I said, Iris, figure it out. You want them? That's part of the deal. And she certainly did figure it out. And to show how wonderful this family was, Iris was a kid's agent, and again, both River and Joaquin. Well, then he was Leaf.
Right, Leaf. Yeah.
He was actually, his original name was Joaquin, but he wanted to have a funny name like his brothers and sisters, so he called himself Leaf. But what happened when they began doing heavy-duty movies and making real money? They went to a bigger agency. I think it was CAA. But part of the deal was that CAA would have to pay a percentage of their commissions to Iris. And that happened with both boys. And to me, that's one of the few times I've ever heard of someone being not responsible, but doing the right thing by doing that. Mm-hmm. And that's the kind of family they are.
Oh, that's good to hear. Joaquin, his first big acting job, at least, was Parenthood, right? I mean, he's cast his credits. He's Lee Phoenix in that.
Yeah, but he also did I think, an episode. I forgot what the television series was, where he played a kid who was with some sort of, some sort of problems, and he was amazing, amazing, throwing an autistic fit on camera. He was incredible. But yes, Parenthood was the first one, that first movie.
Yeah.
Yes, and also, what was the other one with Nicole Kidman? To Die For, was that the name of it? Where the broadcaster who's having these little affairs with all these little kids. I think it was To Die
I
For.
believe you're correct.
And he was wonderful in that. And he climbed the ladder little by little, doing all these sort of unusual parts. And it wasn't until Joker that he really exploded.
And I'm assuming, I think I know the answer to this because you've already told numerous stories about how you develop personal relationships with these actors, correct? So you're talking to them outside of the business world.
Well, yeah, no, I mean, well, like I said, his mother was, the kids came to the office practically every day, so the hours for a casting assistant, like his mother was, were long. It was like 10 o'clock till whenever. Fortunately, they lived nearby. And when I hired his mother, every time she would always present, well, I can't do this because. I can't do this because, well, I got to go home and make dinner for them. And it's like, well, John can do that. Or, but we're vegan. I'm getting ahead of myself, but I said, all right, well, if they come to the office, there's a vegan restaurant nearby. They can have anything they want. And so for every problem that she raised, I gave an alternative. So that's why the kids were at the studio a lot, and they loved coming to NBC. And also, these were kids, they would greet you with a smile and a hug.
Mm-hmm.
This was natural. This wasn't a kid actor affectation, but their family was all about love.
Mm-hmm.
I don't have kids, I don't have a family. And so they became my nieces and nephews in a way. And the first time I had dinner at their house, I had a very stressful job, but the minute I walked into their house, I think my blood pressure went down 30 points. Because they were just such a wonderful, loving family that, it rubbed off on you. And everyone in the building loved them. Everyone in the building loved them.
Well, I bring that up because when, obviously we lost River at a very young age because of the demons. Do you step in? Do you see that? Or do you just let it go?
Well, I didn't know about it. And I don't think it was demons. I think that all kids do certain stupid things at certain times. I mean, he was not a druggie. He was not. I mean, he was going to, and from what I know, he was going to the Viper that night seriously because of music. His music career was as important to him as his acting career. He really wanted a career in music. So, that was not something that he did on a regular basis. So let's say, and here's what I think. He was also taking a cold medicine. And there have been several instances where a cold medicine will interfere with certain other drugs. And that's what happened to him.
God, what a shame. He was such a fantastic actor.
But he was also a fantastic person. But you're right, he was a fantastic actor, and who knows what? Well, I know what would have happened. He would have become Brad Pitt, or he would have become whoever. But it was very sad. It was very, very sad. But I know he was not a club kid, and this was not something that was habitual.
Yeah, it's so sad. Do you want to go back to the 70s? You want to talk Grease, or do you want to move forward and go Don Johnson?
Well, John Johnson is very simple. Don Johnson, Miami Vice, then we can go back. No one at NBC could agree on the casting of Miami Vice. I did something that I fell into the network trap for a while, which was, well, he did 3 pilots for us and they all tanked, so why are we going back to him again? That's traditional network thinking. Of course, what I should have thought was, well, but this is a completely different role that he's really right for. So, but I wanted Gary Cole, and I think Gary Cole would have been good in that part. But another executive wanted Larry Wilcox. Another NBC executive wanted something else. And since none of the NBC executives could agree, the very wise Brandon Tartikoff said, well, if this is the way we all feel, why don't we let Michael Mann decide who he wants and we'll do that? So it's a very simple story, but it was also the right story and the right thing to do. And of course, he was sensational.
God, just take that. It could have been Gary Cole instead of Don Johnson. You know, one, how would that have changed Miami Vice, which was a game changer for pop culture? It was the first to use the music, the Phil Collins in the Air Tonight, to use the bright fluorescent lights. It was showcasing a whole new world that we were living in. It was part of the MTV generation. And Gary Cole, as much as I love Gary Cole, I can't even fathom what he would be in as that role of Sonny Crockett.
But you hadn't seen him at the Steppenwolf Theater in Chicago playing a whole slew of soldiers and rougher parts.
You're right.
I had.
Wow.
Because I would do that. I would go over the country and to the prominent theaters and see people. But again, I think Don Johnson obviously was better, but it would have worked with Gary Cole too because of Michael Mann and the writing. The style of the show wouldn't have changed at all. It would have been the same style. But again, the right person got the part.
Yeah,
you're right.
I agree. All right. Well, one of the biggest movies of all time, Grease.
Yes.
Just watched it the other night. Now, before you start, Joel,
yes,
there is a continuous debate amongst me, my friends, my audience, whatever. I'm sorry to say this, but I think Grease 2 is better than Grease 1.
Oh, you're all effing crazy.
No. It's just me and like one other person. Everybody else thinks I'm effing crazy.
Well, you are. But the thing is, what Grease 2 had, it had a couple of really great musical numbers.
Yeah.
It had the number in the bowling alley.
Yeah.
And the first number was really good. But that's Pat Birch. She did a sensational job. But there was zero chemistry between... what do you call it? Between
Matthew
Michelle
and Michelle.
There was zero chemistry. And if you look at it again, the way those characters were not really introduced well off the bus, it was terrible. It really was terrible. So yeah, I disagree with you.
Who would you have cast instead of the guy that plays Michael? Not Matthew, Michael.
Wait, I'm sorry. On what show are we talking about? Michael?
Grease 2. It's Michael.
That was his character
name?
That was
his character name. Yeah, he also went and he was the rock star in Tower Records or whatever.
No, he's a wonderful actor, but but let me put it this way: Alan Carr, who produced that, left to his own devices, has only done flops. Alan Carr he was great at certain things like promotion, but he was really terrible about doing all the other things. It wasn't good. And I don't do sequels, so I can't answer that.
Oh, so John Travolta had no interest in doing Grease 2?
None whatsoever. Nor did Olivia. I think some of the kids did, but no, neither of the two of them wanted that.
Was it beneath them at the time because of the success?
It's not beneath it. I think they were smart enough to know you can't recreate the magic that happened in the first one. It's impossible. It's absolutely impossible. Every single element in the original movie of Grease, and when I'm not talking about the actors, I'm talking about set design, costume, music. Everything was perfect. You only do a sequel if you can improve on it. Godfather 2, many say, was better than Godfather 1.
Right.
But Airplane 2, please.
Ooh, that's
come on.
Pretty good. Not as good, but pretty good, I got to tell you.
Oh, your standards are lower than mine. I'm sorry.
Hey, I would go Empire Strikes Back over A New Hope, and I'm a Star Wars fanatic.
Okay, I agree on those two, but seriously, Grease 2 was just it just wasn't, and there were good people in it. Lorna Luft is a good friend, and Adrian Zemed remains a friend. So it's not the people's fault. It was the piece. What we forget is Grease 1 was based on a successful Broadway musical.
Right.
Grease 2 was something to make money. Mm-hmm. And it did not have the good music. That music is the movie of Grease not only had the original music from Broadway, it also had Olivia's John Farrar wrote several new songs, and Louis St. Louis wrote another song, all of which were wonderful that were not in the play. I mean, Hopelessly Devoted to You was not original. John singing Sandy was not original. You better shape up. The last one was just incredible. The Funhouse. So you can't repeat that. You really can't. And I speak to John all the time. And there's a Super Bowl commercial that you'll see, I guess, day after tomorrow, where they spoof Summer Nights a little bit.
Oh, really?
Grease is going to be around for 1,000 years. It's never going to disappear. Grease is not a documentary. So the fact that we wound up with actors who were, say, closer to 30 than 20, I think worked for the piece.
And you cast the whole movie?
Yes, I cast the whole movie.
So who did you have instead of John Travolta and Olivia Newton-John? Who else auditioned?
None.
Oh.
The movie came about because of John, because Paramount knew the only way they could make that movie would be someone who distributors would be okay with. So John was there. John wanted Olivia. When I was speaking to, and John and I've known John since he was 17. So while we don't have dinner 4 nights a week, we talk a lot. But he said, "What do you think of Olivia Newton-John?" I said, "That's a great idea." And she was on tour, so we couldn't really get her in for a while. But the more I thought about it, the better the idea became. And when we approached Olivia, she didn't want to do it. I mean, not so much didn't want to do it, but she was very unsure.
Really?
She was worried that she was a few years older than John. She had done one movie before, and she didn't think she was a good actress. She was embarrassed about that other movie. She asked for a screen test. And I'd never heard of an actor asking for a screen test before or since. That shows you how smart Olivia was. And when people talk about Olivia, they always begin with how beautiful and how lovely, when they should begin with how smart. But we never do that with women. We always go to the beauty first. Well, and end of that comment. But so there was a screen test, and I did the screen test, and it worked.
Yeah, I'll definitely agree with you on the Grease thing, is that it will live forever, but when shot and done, and that's the way television was at that time. And we were still very I guess the business was kind of racist, maybe, possibly. You can say that.
I write in my book that the 70s and 80s, it was totally separate and unequal.
Right.
In all aspects. And I find myself, I realized at that point I was also culturally biased. And there is not one black person in Greece. Yes, there is one, and he's a member of the band Shana Na.
Right.
but in 2019 we did concert tours in Florida. We would sing-alongs. So the movie would be played with Follow the Bouncing Ball, and the audience would sing along, and then John and Olivia would come out for a Q&A. And what I did was I wrote phony audience questions for the Q&A in case there were no good questions coming from the audience. But while I was there, I went over there were 2 black women who were sitting close to an aisle. And just for myself, I walked over to them. I said, "I'm the casting director, so-and-so. I'm just curious, there are no black people or people of color in the movie. Just how do you feel? Do you think anything about that?" And the women said to me, "We love the movie, and that's the way things were at that time."
Mm-hmm.
So, but it was always, it's something that in retrospect always bothers me.
Did you also, as a gay man in the business, did you have to, through these times of divide, separation, whatever ism you want to put in there, struggle with casting closeted gay men and women in the business? Because at that time, nobody was coming out, right?
No, nobody was coming out. I never had a problem with anything like that at all. First of all, I was never in, so I couldn't come out. All the people, and I also was very lucky to start in New York, where nobody cares. But, I was at a part of the business where nobody really cared either. And I had no desire to run a network. I had no desire to break through a glass ceiling of sort. And by the way, many gay people did in television. Many gay men became heads of networks or studios. later on, but that never it was a non-issue as far as I was concerned, and I would always be. One time, Brandon Tartikoff asked me about an actor we'd cast in a TV movie, and he said, "Is that person gay?" I said, "I don't know, Brandon. Why don't you ask him?"
Did he?
That's my answer.
Did he ask him?
Of course not. But that's the way to shut that down. It's none of you. It's none of my business. If you're curious, ask him.
Yeah.
The next time you meet him, ask him.
Last one, and I'll let you go.
Yeah, I can stay all night. You're fun.
Oh, I appreciate that, and I'd love to have you for forever and ever, because one of my favorite, before I get to the Tom Cruise stuff, one of my favorite things to ask an actor that I'll have on, on the show is who else was up for the part. Because in my mind, and I'm a movie junkie, television show junkie, but I'm like a useless fact kind of guy. I like to know, okay, I knew that it was Leaf Phoenix, not Joaquin Phoenix in Parenthood. Those little things, when I see it, I'll research it while I'm watching it, just because I love useless / full information. The stuff we'll get to the stuff with Tom Cruise, but
so in other words, you do well on Jeopardy.
Actually, I don't, but I like to know that stuff. I forget where I was going with that, but anyway, Tom Cruise, you got advice at one time about Tom Cruise, and you ignored it because you saw something in this guy that became kind of a big deal later in life, right?
Well, no, what happened was we were doing a silly, basically it was Superboy, but with different names. It was like a prince from outer space lands on Earth, and the wise person was Gossett, Lou Gossett, but it was the prince on Earth, in disguise, and how to deal with the superpowers, and so Tom Cruise, against all of his agents and managers' advice, wanted to do this piece. Now, I'd never met him. I'd only seen him do a movie called Taps, which was set in a boys' boarding school, and he was the villain. And he did such a great job in that movie playing a villain that I thought, well, this guy is very unlikable. No, it's the wrong choice for this. Anyway, my assistant, a wonderful woman by the name of Mary Buck, this is when I was head of talent at Paramount, said, Joel, you taught me never judge by one facet. You have to look at everything. And I didn't move from that position. And so we passed over Tom Cruise very stupidly to hire somebody else.
Who did you hire?
Peter, oh God, his name just went out of my head, but he was a current soap star on one of the NBC shows. I should know it if I looked it up, but I can't turn the pages of the book that fast.
What year is this?
It would have been late 70s. It would have been, I started working at NBC in 81, so it would have been somewhere on an extremely late 70s.
And Taps didn't come out to the early 80s, I thought.
Well, no, it had, because I was at NBC in 81. So it was we can look it up and you'll find it out very quickly, but I don't know. But I saw Taps and I made a mistake. Yeah. And one thing I do in the book is I admit my mistakes. This is not a book extolling that I was always right. I mean, this is a book which shows how, I think the Sex, Drugs, and Pilot Season shows all aspects of my career where I wasn't always right. And I would never, ever take credit for someone else. And like we talked about Golden Girls, and I talk about Judith Weiner being a sensational casting director, but Mary Buck was right. So I was wrong. But then again, you never know what would have happened if we had hired Tom Cruise. Maybe he never would have had that movie career.
Well, that's what I'm saying is, if you believe in, which I do, there's a reason behind everything. Everything has a reason. That kind of thing. Is Taps, great movie? George C. Scott, Timothy Hutton, Sean Penn, Tom Cruise. It was just stacked full of. It was kind of like Outsiders, stacked with just so much talent, raw talent. But then I think the next movie he does is Risky Business, which then shoots him into superstardom.
Well, if I'd seen Risky Business first, I would have had a different answer.
Yeah, and Risky Business, I mean, that, Tracy Lords, Bob Seger puts him in a different category in the 80s, right? Versus what he did in the 70s. It's great.
I have learned through a very smart boyfriend friend of mine, that there are no coincidences.
Yeah.
Everything happens for a reason. So, we're right. Yes.
You are just, I mean, a fascinating man. Thank you so much for giving me all this time and my audience all this time. There's more to the story, a lot more, in which everybody can read in Joel Thurm's book, Sex, Drugs, and Pilot Season, Confessions of a Casting Director. I could spend all day with you, Joel. I mean, but I want people to buy your book. So I want to read your book.
I do too. And they, I got I'm all flustered because I got a call from someone whose work, and just on my machine, you remember the name Sid and Marty Krofft? They did a lot of cartoon shows.
No, I'm not familiar.
Oh, well, anyway, the point, they practically ran the business. They had all of it. But I got a call from someone I didn't work with. His name was Sid Krofft on my machine, thanking me. He read the book and he was thanking me for it. And, it makes me feel so good, because I really do explain so many things in the book, that people just don't know how things happen and why they happen. And I hope that this sheds some light on a very mysterious area.
This needs to be a docuseries, on Netflix. And every time you have a story that, whether it's Pearl Bailey, Don Johnson, Ted Danson, or whatnot, then they are on, if they're obviously still around, to be on and explain how it happened in their own words, which would be phenomenal.
Yeah. No, and Ted has, and Danny DeVito has, and Mary Lou Henner has, at various times. But yeah, no, they've been wonderfully supportive and helpful in the book. So hey, it's this is my third act, and I'm enjoying it.
And that's another one real quick, is that you convinced NBC President Grant Tinker at the time to use Ted Danson for Cheers instead of William Devane, who's a fine actor. But I can't imagine Cheers, without Ted Danson.
Well, as long as I can curse, we can end on this story if we have to end.
Please.
Which is William Devane was pretty much exactly what was written in the script. But one thing that I was really good at was I always I looked out of the box. Okay, this is what's written, but maybe it'll be a little better if we move a little to the side or do something slightly different. So it did come down to those two actors, William Devane, who was a wonderful, wonderful actor, and I knew him as a friend too, and Ted Danson. But to me, it was clear, and Shelley Long we agreed on from the very beginning. But after the final auditions, when I say we all, there were no women included, if you can imagine. And we're discussing, the executives are talking about the differences between two men. There's, which one is hotter, which one is sexier. I mean, it was ridiculous when you come to think of it, without having a woman in that room, but that's the way things were. And Grant Tinker I had worked with Grant because of the Bob Newhart show and other pilots I did for MTM, so we knew each other. And he had just taken over. Fred Silverman was fired, and Grant came in. And Grant is a very, very proper man. You always see him very Brooks Brothery, very, Easter egg color sweater wrapped around his neck all the time, as he was just on his way to, golf or tennis or something. Anyway, it came down to Grant and I arguing in front of everybody else, not arguing politely. And, one of the things that Grant, and it just kept on and on and on. And finally Grant said, well, he's one of America's finest actors. How could you say no for this? I said, yes, he is one of America's finest actors, but not in this role. And finally I said, look, it comes down to this, Grant. More women in America are going to want to Ted Danson than Bill Devane. And he made a gesture as if to clutch his pearls. He brought his hands to his neck and sort of leaned back in the chair a little bit. And the next time we went around the room, everybody was on Ted's side. But so I have a mouth and I use it, and and my default is foul, but it works. I mean, if you read the book, you know what I had to do to get what's his name, David Hasselhoff into Knight Rider. You know,
Just so everybody knows, the reason why Ted Danson is a part of our television lives is because he's more fuckable.
Well, what do you think? Which one was more fuckable to you?
Absolutely, Ted Danson. I would lay him in a second. There's no doubt about it.
Well, I'll ask him if Mary will let him off for a night or two. So we'll see.
All right, Joel Thurm, Sex, Drugs, and Pilot Season: Confessions of a Casting Director. That is the book. Pick it up, buy it, read it, enjoy it. Joel, thank you so much for all this time.
Well, thank you so much. This has really been fun. Anytime you want me back, I'm available. I'm cheap and easy, so anytime.
Aren't we all?